The dollar, the greatest strength of the United States, is under attack. Countries around the world are teaming up to turn their back on the dollar and create their own world reserve currency. In this video, let's talk about exactly what is happening, why it's happening, if it's a real concern going forward, and of course what this means for you. Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, otherwise known as BRICS, cute name guys, are teaming up to create their own alternative to the world reserve currency, which is technically still the US dollar. But before we go forward, let's go back to talk about the concept of the world reserve currency and what exactly it means to be one, because the world reserve currency has been very cyclical in history. Since 1450, there have actually been 6 major world reserve currency periods. More recently, France held this title from 1720 to 1815, followed by Great Britain ending in 1920, and the US dollar became the reserve currency shortly after that, and still obviously holds that title today. So for the last 100+ years, the US dollar has been at the center of the world. On average, each currency held its title for about 94 years, meaning the US dollar is technically past the point of expiration. So why is all this happening now? A more important question might be why the world even needs a reserve currency in the first place. When a currency becomes the world reserve, there are 3 main characteristics it possesses. The first is stability. Stability makes it so much easier for international trade. Just like when you communicate with someone verbally, you need a common language. In this case, a common currency is needed that everyone can agree on. And this is because, to be blunt, most countries don't trust each other. They don't know how much of the other currency is being printed, which could significantly impact the value of the other currency. Instead, they use a world reserve currency, knowing that no matter what they trade, the value of the reserve currency is transparent and stable. The second characteristic for the country that holds the world reserve currency is it becomes an investing juggernaut. Why? The world likes to use the most stable form of currency, which is still the US dollar. And countries all around the world need to have a dollar wallet, which is called the foreign exchange reserves. Just like the banks, countries don't use all the money that's actually in their dollar wallet. And what they don't use gets invested in US treasuries and securities, because they wouldn't have to worry about any crazy exchange rate. The final benefit to the US dollar being the world reserve currency is its exclusivity to buying oil. After World War II, the US created something known as the Bretton Woods Agreement.
At Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, delegates from 44 allied and associate countries arrived for the opening of the United Nations Monetary and Financial Conference,
where gold was the basis for the US dollar and essentially tied all currencies around the world to the dollar. The dollar remained a powerhouse until the early 1970s, when the United States ran out of money. The United States was no longer able to continue up their arrangement of dollars for gold.
I have directed Secretary Connally to suspend temporarily the convertibility of the dollar into gold or other reserve assets, except in amounts and conditions determined to be in the interest of monetary stability and in the best interest of the United States.
This was a very troubling time for the dollar, as the only thing it was able to redeem was more debt. The US had been using the dollar for favorable foreign policy, but its time was running out, and running out fast. So when the US was unable to deal dollars for gold, why didn't the other countries just go back to using their own currency? They literally couldn't, due to the stranglehold that the dollar had on buying oil. In 1945, the US made a deal with Saudi Arabia in which the US dollar was the only allowable currency for oil trading. This was the birth of what is known as the petrodollar. So in order for other countries to continue powering their country with oil, they needed to hold the US dollar to do so, making the US dollar a necessity around the world. So those 3 reasons, stability, investing juggernaut, and the petrodollar, are the main reasons why the US dollar had been such a powerhouse this last century. And at times, they've even used their dominance to cut off other countries from using fossil fuels. When this happens, of course, these countries rebel, especially those that can produce their own energy within their own border. Fast forward to today, and this is exactly why the countries are turning their back on the US dollar and are gaining traction as BRICS. I still can't get over this name. Who's in charge of their marketing department? It reminds me of the old cartoon TV show Captain Planet, where they all had separate superpowers.
By your powers combined, I am Captain Planet.
After going through all that, down in the comments, let me know what currency you think will be the world reserve currency in the year 2035. Currently, the US dollar is actually the most valuable it's been in the last 20 years. So what's all this fuss about the dollar weakening? To dive deeper, let's look at 3 metrics that are driving its value. The first is the foreign exchange rate. The exchange rate to other currencies is measured by the US dollar index. Since 2020, the value of the dollar has been gradually weakening, but again, compared to the last 20 years, the dollar is still at a much stronger point than the drop indicates. Second is the demand for 10-year treasury notes, which are typically the most common loan to the government and is seen as a very safe way to store people's money, as long as there is still demand for it. In terms of the dollar, the rising interest rates are pushing for a higher demand of the higher yielding bonds. But according to some, we may be at the peak of the dollar rally. And third is the volume of the foreign currency reserve, which measures how much of the US dollar other countries are holding. Currently, the US dollar makes up over 60% of all world reserve currencies. But looking at it over the last 20 years is where it gets concerning, as the dollar has been steadily declining with other currencies taking its place. This is why the formation of BRICS is so important. The main goal for these countries is to transact with each other in their own reserve currency to try to weaken the value of the US dollar. But if we look closer, there have been breadcrumbs leading to this moment for years. China has been positioning itself away from the US dollar since 2010. Russia and India both did away with the US dollar within the last year. Saudi Arabia recently said it was open to the idea of trading in Chinese currency, which would be especially concerning since the petrodollar is one of the United States' most powerful assets. With all that being said, it's time to answer the question, is the US dollar in trouble? One surefire way to save the US dollar is by smashing the like button for this video. Trust me, it'll work. To be honest, the future of the US dollar is certainly uncertain, but the reality is there's nothing close right now that's going to be taking its place. Despite China's economy being poised to outpace the US by 2030, and the BRICS economies being some of the fastest growing nations in the world, the US dollar still accounts for the vast majority of all transactions. The bar graph represents the daily transactional volume, while the line graph represents the daily transactional share. So while the US does not hold the transactional majority, it has overwhelming control of the transactional share, which is much more important. With the United States' internal problems always being the current focus, its reserve currency role has definitely been taken for granted. There's a very real danger that other countries see an opening and want to compete. With countries like Saudi Arabia entering a new trade alliance, this puts more pressure on the United States. Even though the US dollar is being transacted with less and there is more competition, the dollar still has a huge advantage because of its role in the world markets and flexible monetary policy. That's just not going to change overnight. This is definitely an issue to keep on your radar, but nothing really to panic about. So make sure you subscribe to the channel to get more updates as they happen, as well as other videos to help you level up your personal finances. Speaking of your personal finances, you and I and everyone else literally have zero control over what's happening with the US dollar. So my suggestion for you is that you focus on something that you can actually control, like having a consistent income stream to pay for your expenses, building a side hustle that can compound on itself over time, investing 15 to 25% of your paycheck for your retirement, diversify your portfolio with index funds, and invest consistently into the market. Doing all of these will set you up to be in the best financial position you can be. One way to put yourself in the worst possible financial situation is by saving money. That's right, I said it. Find out why saving money is actually costing you money and what you should be doing instead in this video here.